Hey, I'm Robert Pearson, and this is Follow the Leader, where I sit down on my lunch break and we go through a Bible verse, or three or so. We're going through the man cards one at a time. They have Bible verses on them and a few questions to keep your mind moving on it and really think about how the scripture applies to what you're doing today and tomorrow, and hopefully for the rest of your life, right? So, the goal is to become a better man, husband, and father by just kind of looking at what the standard is in the Bible. Not that we would earn our salvation, obviously, but that because we have been saved from death by Christ, we should strive to please Him and follow His example as best we can. So here we go. We are in Proverbs chapter 19, and we're going to go through verses 11, 19, and then verse 3 of chapter 20. Proverbs is a book of little wisdom sayings, and they're all kind of all over the place. And so the verses are usually about 3 of them that all follow a common theme, and they'll be within about the same page, depending on your edition of the Bible. So, here we go. Chapter 19 of Proverbs, verse 11. A man's discretion makes him slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook a transgression. 19:19. A man of great anger will bear the penalty, for if you rescue him, you will only have to do it again. And then chapter 20, verse 3. Keeping away from strife is an honor for a man, but any fool will quarrel. So, where does your mind go when you read this? And I immediately think of the last time I got angry and said or did something I regret. So for me, it's actually at church this last Sunday. Wednesday? It was Wednesday night at church. I was really frustrated at the timing of everything. We were trying to get home and get to bed, get the family to bed early enough so we could have a good start to the next day. And there was always, oh, we forgot this, and there was one more thing. It was one of those. And I let slip. I got really frustrated. I haven't been this angry in a long time. And I punched the back of our minivan, left a couple dents in it. And then was able to stuff it and move on with what needed to be done. And I apologized to everyone afterwards. And it was, I don't know, we used it as a teaching moment. Not perfect. And life goes on. You apologize for it, you own it, and you keep going. So, that's what I think about when I read this kind of stuff. And so between these, obviously anger is kind of the focus of these. But, it doesn't just help you to say, oh, don't be angry. Don't be angry. That's no good. But if you look at it of how can I use this to avoid being angry, a man of great anger will bear the penalty. For if you rescue him, you only have to do it again. So if you stay an angry person, there's going to be consequences over the long term. And so in those moments of anger, thinking about, I'm going to have to deal with these consequences later. Is this actually worth it? Keep away from strife is an honor for a man, but any fool will quarrel. And thinking about, it's more honorable to set aside this struggle, this quarrel, this thing that seems so important to me right now, because only a foolish person is going to engage, if it is something truly trivial. And a man's discretion makes him slow to anger, and his glory to overlook a transgression. That it's wise. The more that you know, the more that you think about things in their true and proper perspective, the more you realize that it's just not a big deal. This is written by Solomon, who also wrote Ecclesiastes, and the punchline for Ecclesiastes is, we all die at the end. Whatever you do, it's not going to make you live longer. Longer than 100 years, 80 years, or whatever. You don't get to decide when you die, and stressing out about some little thing like how quickly you get out of church or how much your kids are screaming or whatever, that's not worth it. It doesn't make any sense to be to allow yourself to be angry about that for very long. You get provoked to anger, but then you need to be an adult and stop and think, hey, where is this in the grand scheme of things? Is this important? Okay, if it is, then how do we move forward from it? Anger is a word we like to throw around words that we don't really take the effort to define. We just assume everybody knows what it means, and it may not always be the case. Next question here, define anger using only one sentence. I'm a firm believer in the one sentence definition. You don't really know what something is till you can define it in one sentence. When you can describe, this is not a run-on sentence, a single, precise sentence. Only then do I think can you really know what something is. You just kind of assume that you know, and you have this vague, cloudy, blurry concept. Take the time, think about it, put it into one sentence, in your words. So, I usually like doing Bible verses to get my one sentence. I'll dig up as many Bible verses as I can find that use the same concept or idea, for anger as an example. Dig up everywhere in the Bible that God gets angry, and look at the things that make him angry and what all those have in common, and go, okay, well, this is good anger versus bad anger, and all the times it's negative. What do those all have in common? And kind of mash that together into one sentence. You see a lot of phrases or other auxiliary words that get repeated over and over and over again, and you go, oh, here's a biblical definition of anger. Boop. So, it sounds more complicated than it is. It's just a matter of hitting up the Google search list of verses about anger, and then just read them, and then read them all in different translations, and then really boil it down, because you don't want what you think it is. You want what the Bible says it is. And those usually are the same thing, but you can't always assume that that's accurate. All right, so for me, a general definition, though, is the emotional reaction when you don't get what you want. Is a really broad anger. So it's an emotional reaction when you don't get what you want. And that fits for all the times that God is angry, because the Israelites are in idolatry, is I think the only thing that the Bible describes God being angry over is idolatry. And he wants them to worship him exclusively, and then they don't. God did not get what he wanted in that instance, which was, wholehearted obedience. And then he has that emotional reaction. We are, in part, emotional creatures, and we also are, in totality, created in the image of God. So it makes sense that God has, to some extent, within what little we can understand, emotions. And Jesus cries, and God gets angry, and both of them love, and we see that it's very inherent in humans and how we are. So the emotional reaction when you don't get what you want. So what's the biggest barrier for us for living a life where we're slow to anger, where we avoid getting into trouble and the penalties associated with anger, and we keep away from strife? What's the biggest hurdle for us to overcome? And I'd have to say it's habit. I had an anger issue for a really long time, and I've come many strides farther, to the point where I wouldn't say that I really have a temper anymore. But there are days, and there'll be moments where things that I get upset about, but not often, not much, but it happens. And it was always a matter of habit, where I would find something that my thoughts would be a certain pattern of, this makes me angry, so I do this, and then I do this, and it got very habitual, where you fall in a comfortable routine of, this kind of event happens, this thing is what plays out. A lot of it was rooted in being mad at myself for not being good enough. Just 100%. That's what almost all of the times I got angry wasn't really at the moment, but at myself for not being good enough to avoid the mistake, or to not have made the mistake in the first place, or to leave the house on time. And but seeing that consistency, taking some time to understand it, I was able to go, okay, these are the habits that lead up to these anger outbursts, and then figuring out how to mitigate those steps in the path. You know, if A always leads to B, always leads to C, C being your like outburst where you're upset and you're yelling and tirading through the house, yelling and cussing about being late or not being able to find something, as I have done in the past, then don't sit there and try and wrestle with C all day long. Find A. Fix A first, because then C happens less often, and then your life is a little more relaxed, so you can go, okay, why am I doing this? And you can work at the root problem. But A is the way you start. So for like, can't find your keys. Well, I leave them in the pocket of my pants 100% of the time. So I go home, get in comfortable pants, I leave my dirty pants on the floor in the same place, so that my keys never go anywhere but right there. Or, you know, some guys use a dish or a bowl or a drawer, but you do something little and simple so that having my keys in the same place every time keeps my anger in check. Now, that's only superficial. You got to then spend time with the Lord in prayer and the Bible, figure out where the source of your anger is and what up here is causing that to happen. But so you're not acting like an idiot more often than you need to, you get a little Band-Aid over it of, well, I get angry. This is the thing that makes me angry. I'm getting lost, losing my keys, being late. So you start doing stuff the night before. You start keeping track of your keys. You start looking at the directions before you're driving down the road. And you get all of those things in line so that you spend less time in the angry tirades, but then you have to spend your free time now figuring out why the angry tirades, not just go, well, I solved it, because then the one time you lose your keys, back to square one. The problem isn't your keys. They're showing you a bigger problem. You got to deal with that. So, but that's the biggest barrier, though, is habits, right? Your habit is to just do whatever with your keys when you get home. Now you can't find them. Now you get angry. Okay, you start spiraling out of control and going in circles and circles and circles. It's a crazy cycle, to borrow a phrase from Emerson Eggerichs, Love and Respect. Awesome series. Go read it. Google Love and Respect and Emerson, and you'll find an awesome marriage resource. And now he's got a parenting book out where he uses the same crazy cycle principle. But that's the idea, though. He does it in the context of relationships, but it happens in your relationship with yourself and how you act in the world around you. All right, so that's all I got. Give me your answers to some of these questions, ideas, thoughts, comments, and come see me over on Facebook, unless you're already on Facebook, in which case, welcome. And I will see you next time. Godspeed.